Hi, everyone. This is Christina Barr, and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about, of course, Afghanistan, touch on that a bit. We're going to be talking about Biden and his administration and how it's like they're trying to focus on that so you don't have to focus on Afghanistan. They'll come in, they'll have a press conference, start talking about COVID stuff, won't really take much questions, if any at all, and then they'll go on, and America's just like, the world's just kind of like, what, we have like a real crisis over here. Not that, COVID isn't a thing that people still need to talk about, but they're trying to really pump up the fear, really trying to pump up the control. And that's something that they're really going to hamper down on now that the FDA has officially approved it for just before it was just emergency use. And now it is the Pfizer vaccine is now approved by the FDA, though they are still running safety trials. Those are not complete and won't be for some time, like some years, but it's approved. And now they're going to use it to be able to have employers and other places try to force you to get it. So, and Biden is calling for it, and I'll play a clip of that. So we're going to be talking about that, and the new Spiderman trailer dropped, and I want to talk about it, and I'll probably talk about it at the end, because spoiler alert, well, not spoiler alert, but FYI, I'm not really a fan of the MCU Spider-Man movies, and there's some things in the trailer that are really reminiscent of one of the worst Spider-Man stories in the comic books that has ever been created, and I want to talk about it. So if you're watching and you know me a little bit, you know that I come from a nerdy family. I am a nerd. I don't have much love for comic books and stuff anymore because I don't really think a lot of people who write them have a lot of love for them, or the fans who have made them great. And you can tell that by the way that they shove agenda rather than trying to tell a good story down your throat. So we're going to talk about all those things. But before we jump into it, I do want to thank Brighter Michigan Pack. I'm in their studio. As always, if you don't like what I have to say, they don't care. I don't care. No one cares if you're triggered. There's no one to complain to get me fired. It doesn't work like that. I'm just using the studio. God bless them. And please go to blacktnews.com. Check out content that I've written. I've already written an article on the Spider-Man thing. So if you want to spoiler alert and spoil yourself, you can go ahead and I guess jump on the website and go read that right now. But why would you do that? I'm going to run through it. Some other things. I have a really good story that I'm about to drop on there. Let's say I did something really fun on the weekend that you guys are going to find really interesting, but I'm not going to talk about it until tomorrow. But I'm going to write an article about it, and I'll also be dropping that tomorrow too. But it's really, really fascinating. You're going to want to hear about it, but I'm not going to talk about it until tomorrow, just FYI. But it's going to be, I got some great stories for you. I did something really, really interesting over the weekend. So please go to blacktnews.com and check out the content that I have on there. Please check out different merchandise that I have. You can get different shirts. You can get different mugs, stuff with the logo on it. You can get, be better, not bitter shirt, which a lot of people need to embrace that message. Got Trump stuff. Of course, I got to show you guys the GOAT hoodie and the Denounce White Supremacy, Defeat Joe Biden shirt with the list of his racist atrocities on the back. And what the heck? I am not the victim you're looking for, since we are talking nerd stuff today later on in the show. And also, if you would like to donate, you can go to the website, blacktnews.com/donate to donate, or you can also do it via PayPal or Cash App via the instructions that are scrolling across the screen. So let's get to it. The stories of the day. As you know, I like to start with a meme, and this one comes from the actor James Woods. He tweeted this out. Oh, I got to get rid of that little ticker so you can see it. Obama's birthday party. Your child. Yeah, that's exactly what the world is like right now. Obama was living it up at his party. People were maskless. People weren't obviously social distancing. They were dancing. They said everybody was vaccinated, but there's reports that that isn't true. Candace Owens says she knows some people who were there were definitely not vaccinated. So maybe that's not something that they actually particularly checked or really look into it to check. Some people just, lie and so on. So he was having a good time, but they're trying to make your kids who have virtually, and I'm not going to say no threat, but virtually no threat from COVID, but they are talking about masking them in schools. In New York, they're talking about also forcing mandatory vaccinations for all the teachers, and I don't believe there's going to be any like exemptions or exceptions. So that we have such a shortage of people wanting to work, willing to work, and it's in all sorts of fields. So that is really puzzling. But adults have had the opportunity to get vaccinated if they want to get vaccinated. So I don't see why we have to do our children like this. But while, Obama and other people are celebrating maskless, living their life, they'll put on a mask in front of you and tell you have to wear a mask, but they do whatever they want to. But your kids, they're the next, people they're going after. And if you don't want to wear a mask, or if you don't want your kid to wear a mask, they're just going to say that you want to kill them. So we live in a really disingenuous, crazy world that claims they listen to science, but they're not actually listening to the science. So thank you, James Wood. If you're not aware of James Wood, he is an actor. He had a show that my mom watched. I think he was I can't remember if he was a lawyer or something on the show, but my mom watched it quite a bit. But he is Hades on the Hercules Disney film. So maybe many of you recognize his iconic voice from that. But obviously he's done other things, but he's very politically outspoken. He's been banned from Twitter quite a bit. So today's meme is brought to you by James Woods, the real James Woods, who I'm very surprised is still on Twitter because it's been questionable sometimes. It's been questionable. And he's been kicked off and banned several times. So let's get into it. Let's get into the stories of the day. So technically these happened yesterday, and I had every intention of doing a show yesterday, but I did have some family things that I needed to take care of yesterday. So thank you all for being patient and understanding. But I thought this was really big news. Obviously, it's big news that the FDA has approved the Pfizer vaccine. And there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, it's not even FDA approved. And people would say it is approved. And I think that was mostly people would talk about it not being fully FDA approved to push back on the narrative or the misconception that people had that it was approved. And it was approved for emergency use. Are people who are hesitating to take the vaccine, are they like, oh my gosh, it's approved now, I got to go get it? Are they going to be lining up, running to go get it? I don't think so. I don't think that was the case for a lot of people. And that was a talking point, but I don't think it was like a sincere talking point for the reason of why they weren't going to get it. I think it was just a pushback, like I said, against the misconceptions that people had that it was like all through the approval process. And just because it has gone through their approval process, which there's a ton of data, a lot of people have taken it, correct? But there's obviously not a lot of data for any long-term, like going like an entire year or years down the line, because it's new, right? And so that you can assume that it is safe. Is there like a long-term effect that we've been able to measure and observe in real time? No, obviously not. Obviously not. So people who still want to wait it out, it's the data would suggest it's relatively safe, mostly safe. But no one can tell you that without 100% that nothing is going to happen down the line. Because at least from data that they've been able to observe in real time, because obviously it's a new vaccine. So I still think the people who have a waited out position are rational. And people who decide to take it, you just have to weigh your pros and your cons, and you have to decide what is best for you. But it is available, and people can take it if they want to take it. And that has been the case for a long time. I heard Ben Shapiro, who he is probably the most pro-vaccine person on the right, at least that I have heard. But he took it as soon as it was basically available for him and his parents, and his position is like bureaucracy is what slowed this down, and it should obviously been approved faster. And what were they going to do? Were they going all these people have taken it? Are they going to be like, oh, psych, we're not going to approve it? Like, probably not. And they probably wouldn't have did the emergency use if they really thought there was going to be a big issue that they could foresee. So vaccines do get it. Drugs and stuff that go on the market, they do get recalled. I'm not trying to say that this will be, but they released it. Obviously, they think it is worth taking, and you have to make that decision whether you have a comorbidity, whether you're up in a certain age. If you're unhealthy, you have to weigh those pros and cons. But we live in America. It's supposed to be a free society. And so you can make that decision whether or not you are or aren't going to take it, or at least that you should be able to. You should be able to make that decision. So now that it is approved, you see it being weaponized as a political tool, that not only should you take it, we should have mandates that will make life uncomfortable for you until you decide to take it. You can't work, you can't go to the movies, you can't go to movie theaters unless you take the vaccine. So here is President Biden saying as much. It's true that he can't just mandate everyone take it. But they where people in government have failed to gather enough power to suppress the body, like the citizens, they will turn the citizens on each other if possible to wield their power. And I'll explain after this clip, but I want to play it first.
Today I'm calling on more companies, I should say, in the private sector to step up with vaccine requirements that'll reach millions more people. If you're a business leader, a nonprofit leader, a state or local leader who has been waiting for full FDA approval to require vaccinations, I call on you now to do that. Require it. Do what I did last month. Require your employees to get vaccinated or face strict requirements.
Okay, first things first, yes, he has called for it. And I don't know how that's actually working out, because there's people in the military who said they aren't taking it. There's people who I've heard who said they will retire if they can. There's people saying they're going to quit their jobs in all kinds of places. But as far as like federally controlled, I know someone who works at the post office, and once they came out with this announcement that federal employees will have to do it, I asked about it, and then they said they talked to their union, and the union was like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And then I like looked it up, and it was like unions say, for like talking about the Postal Service, say that they believe people should get it, but they don't believe in the mandates. So I'm curious how the unions are going to push up against this, because there have been teachers unions, who have pushed against the forced vaccinations. Like they had all these demands before they would go back to school, including having like vaccinations and stuff. And now they're like, no, you cannot mandate it. So I wonder at the end of the day how these unions are going to end up impacting the decision to keep pushing for mandates. And if, especially like in the federal level, like, are they going to be able to push the president to not have like the testing, because the rapid testing or the continuous testing is meant to like break your spirits. Because I was with someone yesterday and they took their first like COVID test that they like ever, and they're just like, I'll be gentle, and she's just swabbing it in a swirl up the nose. The person's just like, while like tears are coming out of their eyes. It's not fun. It feels weird. It's painful. People said like that people were trying to like touch their brain stem while doing the COVID test. And I've heard people say that when kids have had it, they've been traumatized, and they're willing to wear the mask, and they'll go to school. They'll do anything just to not have that test again. It is not a fun test that they do. So it's really supposed to be a measure to break your will. but I don't think the unions will go along with that. And the attitude that was how it's said to me is going to be like, nah, we're not going to, that's just talk. We're not going to comply with that. So I wonder how they're going to push that policy, because obviously unions sway, a certain way normally with elections. And if politicians care about money and votes, and if they can affect one thing or both things, they can obviously make the politicians go whatever way they want to go, especially when they're like, okay, if you're not going to deal with us, we can go deal with the other side. So I'm curious to see how far this will go, especially since there's teachers unions who don't want to do it. And in New York City, they're pushing the vaccine passports, and they're also pushing like mandatory vaccines for teachers. And they already have trouble getting enough teachers to teach. And now you're going to mandate the vaccine. So we live in a pretty bonkers world right now. I was at the hospital the other day, and it wasn't for me. I was with someone, but they had to end up going to the ER, and so they went in the ER. They talked to the nurse did not want to tell them like how long it was going to be, and then the nurse finally said, "Well, it's going to be like 4 to 6 hours," and they're like, "Oh no, that is way too long," and so they're like, "I'm just going to go to my hospital that I usually go to," so. But they try to say, well, we got COVID. And so they looked online and they looked at the reviews, and people were talking about insidiously long wait times for years. 4 years. So I question, because I looked at certain things where it's like, articles will say like, oh, the hospitals are overwhelmed. And then they'll name a certain hospital, and you look at the data of like children are over, the hospital has all these kids, like 116% rise in cases with children, and you'll look up the number and it's like 8 kids or something in there. So they play with the numbers about percentages or how many times it's been elevated or so on with the increase, without telling you the hard numbers. Because if you hear the hard numbers, like, oh my gosh, we've had a 100% increase. Well, does that mean you only have 2 people in the ICU with COVID? Is that what that means? So, like we talked maybe about 2 weeks ago about CNN. They ran a story about how many times likely you are to get COVID and die if you're unvaccinated. And it was like going from a 0.0001 chance to a 0.0074 chance or something. So percentage wise, that's like a big difference. But, like in reality, you're still mostly going to be okay. But they portray the news or the data in such a way to drum up fear. So you'll react a certain way. So you'll give them more power. And how much more can they take? How much more can they do? How much more are people willing to put up with? So back to the nurses thing. Like I hear nurses talk about like hospitals are generally like they'll be at close to capacity or mostly capacity. Usually that's a normal thing. And sometimes when they're talking about there's not enough beds and so on, sometimes you got to think about it when you go to like a restaurant and you walk in and it's like, oh, it's going to be especially nowadays, it'll be like, maybe it's going to be a 30-minute wait. And you're looking around and you see all these like empty seats and it's like, why? Or like, how come I can't sit myself over there? It's like, well, because they only have certain sections open, because they only have a certain amount of servers working. And even though you'll be sitting there waiting for your food, you'll be sitting for a while because there's only a certain amount of people. So there's only a certain amount of nurses to be able to accommodate people. And that's what's really trippy about them mandating that you have to get vaccinated or you'll be fired. So it's like they're really playing a game of chicken. I can tell you on nurse TikTok, there's a lot of nurses ready to take that plunge for their body, for their values, to prove a point, to say, hey, you should not be able to do this. And these are people who worked through the pandemic, obviously without obviously without a vaccine, sometimes, with not enough equipment, putting yourself at risk to be able to take care of everyone else. And they were called heroes. And now you're saying, do what we want you to do, or we have to show you the door. So, it's really insane to me. I went to Wendy's for lunch today, and there was a sign that said we got to close at 8 p.m. today. And then at the drive-through, I was like, "Oh, you guys got to close at 8, huh?" She's like, "We just don't have enough people." And she said, "I'm working both windows right now," and we we just don't know how to run if there's any example on why the government shouldn't run your life, I think this is a blatant example. And then they go around saying, like, we saved so many lives, we did this, and so on. Maybe you did. Maybe. Or maybe the draconian measures you took didn't do much. Especially if you were one of the governors who put like elderly with COVID patients, which my governor is one of those people. And let's just say I recently heard her talking about bragging about how many people's lives that she saved, and taking care of the elderly. So I'm dying to tell you guys a story, but I gotta wait till tomorrow. I'm gonna wait till tomorrow to elaborate on it. But in the long run, what have we done to our freedom and our institutions? What is going to be the end result of this? There's a cost to having freedom, for sure. Like, there's a bunch of regulations on what you can't eat, but it could definitely be worse. And they could make the case like you can't eat this, and you only can eat so much of this and this and that. They could really try to regulate how you live and exercise, all this kind of stuff, because they could say it's dangerous to be obese. Okay, but but a lot of people would consider that a step too far in the freedom. But people have the right to be the size that I am, or bigger, larger, smaller, whatever, based on their choices. There's a cost to freedom. And how much are you willing to pay? I don't think it's worth giving up anything. If you can help it. If you can help it. Sometimes it's interesting seeing some things that the media is talking about with Larry Elder, who's running in the recall for governor. If Gavin Newsom, if the majority of people say they want to recall Gavin Newsom, then all the candidates will be considered, and whoever gets the most votes will win. And people think that right now that person will be Larry Elder. And so sometimes they're doing some crazy stories. There's a story over the weekend, and they were like, oh, well, not the weekend, but last week, like, Larry Elder is a white supremacist in blackface. It was the title. And I'm not joking. That was the title of the article. It was the LA Times. And it was terribly racist, obviously. But they're trying everything they can to make this man seem terrible. But Gavin Newsom's having a lot of trouble, and they're so surprised that Hispanics aren't like jumping on board with their plans. I think they're scared out of their mind. They're really scared out of their mind. But sometimes Larry Elder will have a position, and the media will portray it as something like really, really awful. And I just have to keep telling people, like, Larry Elder, he's running as a Republican. He doesn't mind being called a conservative, but he is a libertarian. Is he like some people think libertarian and they think about some of the wacky stuff that you'll see like at the Libertarians convention and stuff? He's not wacky, but if he can err on the side of freedom, and like, his position is, you're an adult, you function with other adults, you guys should be able to figure it out amongst yourselves and not go like tattle to the government to try to have them basically be the gun that's gonna screw over one person and not reward the other person. Like, he doesn't want to do that. So he's gonna err on the side of, I'd rather not interfere, and you guys should be able to figure that out. And some people don't like what that means with certain topics and certain subjects. But what is the alternative? I mean, there's other Republican candidates on the ballot, sure, but he's the main best choice. And there's like Democrats on there too. So I think Republicans should really rally around him. That is my suggestion for Republicans to do, to pick the side of freedom and the person who wants to like kind of give you the most freedom versus Gavin Newsom, who will tell you what you have to do during the lockdowns, who will close down your businesses, have you arrested, fined, et cetera, or whatever. But will go to the French Laundry, minding his own business, hanging out, partying with his friends, maskless and not social distancing. So what would you rather have? Would you rather have unjust tyranny or freedom that you can? Sometimes that works out for you. Sometimes it doesn't work out for you. The specific example, and I want to go into Larry Elder like more in detail another day, but there was a quote or something that he said in a book that he wrote in the I think it was early 2000s. And he said that businesses should be able to talk to, when they're going to hire women, ask questions like, do you plan on starting a family? Do you plan on getting pregnant and stuff? And so the media and people is framing it, and people are taking it as, oh, he says you can discriminate against pregnant women. Or should, where it could, and people are interpreting it as you should be able to discriminate against pregnant women. You can't do that. Like, you can't do that. And he's not making the case. I don't think that you necessarily should do it. And people don't do, you can ask those questions, I believe, but people don't do it because they don't want a possible case to build that would show discrimination. And so if someone gets pregnant and they think their company is discriminating against them because they're a woman or a mother or whatever, and they bring a case, they can go back and say, well, you did ask me, you did prep this about whether or not I was going to have a family and stuff. So, but Larry Elder's position, from what I read in the quotes in the book, was basically like, you can't pretend like someone, being going to need like time off and stuff, or like it's not going to be some kind of cost to the business, or they're not going to have to plan things around it. And I've talked to a lot of females who are managers and who have said something like, you can't just pretend like that's not a factor. Now, if you have a really good employee, I think it's worth, I'm not trying to make the case that you should not have women or pregnant women in the workforce. Absolutely. Why would you not have them in the work? If you have good employees and you have good benefits and you're willing to take care of your people, then they're more appreciative of their company and they're willing to give more into their company. So you should try to make as many benefits to your employees to make your business as attractive as possible. So I definitely don't think you should discriminate against anyone, especially not pregnant people. But his position will always be, I don't want to get involved in your contract or your decisions with you, whatever you decide with your employer and whatever your employer decides to decide with however you're going to work. So is he going to want to put in like extra regulations or whatever? And that probably not, because he leans more libertarian. Now, I know that freaks out conservatives and some Republicans and definitely some Democrats. And he has positions on other things that I think that are a little bit more radical, in the sense of it doesn't screen well on media headlines. But that's his position, to err on the side of more freedom rather than to have the government get involved and tell grown people how they negotiate their contracts, how they decide how they're going to work, or what they eat, where they live, except like a bunch of different things. He believes there's a legitimate role of the government. Obviously, he believes there's a legitimate role, and I think he does differ from libertarians on like, I guess some war positions and like border security and other stuff like that. So he's not like, I don't know. There's a radical range of some libertarians that I've seen. But that's just a little peek into his window and of his mind. So again, you can have someone who's like freedom, and you can take what you will from it, live your life the way you want, which means that you're not always going to get the result that you want because there's other people who are fighting for their freedom and what's best for them. And sometimes they're going to come to a head and you're not going to always like what you get and they're not always going to like what they get. But as long as you're not stepping on each other's rights, like your actual constitutional rights, not your feelings, but your actual rights, then you guys can handle that. They're going to do things that the government is supposed to do, like handle your budget and stuff like that. But on the flip side, you can have Larry Elder, who's like, freedom. I'm going to err on the side of freedom, consequences and all. Or you can have the tyrannical Gavin Newsom, who's like, I'm going to impose, and I'm not going to live by the rules. I'm going to make my own rules, but you peasants have to pay. It's your choice. It's your choice. It's not my state. My state has its own problems. People can decide whatever they want to in regard to Larry Elder, but that's just like a little peek into his window, I believe. And again, I want to go through some more of these headlines and stuff with Larry Elder and some of the things that they're saying. It's really fascinating, the race in California, because I think they're scared because they got some wild headlines. So Biden is on the move with COVID. These other people are going to be on the move with COVID and mandating the vaccine. I told my mom earlier, I said, the more they push it, the more it freaks out I am about it. Like, I just kind of had like a nonchalant attitude about it, I suppose. But I'm just like, why so hard? Why are you pushing it so hard? It's kind of freaky. I think it's freaky. I concur with that. So I'm going to share that. Larry Elder is the best choice for California. I agree. I think people need to come together again with one candidate, supporting one candidate if they can. Other people, there's other people on the ballot. People are going to have different opinions, but he's the one I believe that's most likely to win. And the media is treating it like it's a 2-person race. It's not a 2-person race. It's do you want to keep Gavin Newsom? And here's like 20 different choices. But they are really freaking out because they got some wild headlines about that. So if Gavin Newsom remains in his spot, I believe he will follow Biden's lead with some more COVID lockdowns and restrictions, especially with the FDA approving the Pfizer vaccine. And Biden is calling for employers to call for more mandates. And when in Michigan, when our Michigan Supreme Court struck down Whitmer's, she was using a particular law to try to not try to oppress us all. Then the Supreme Court said that what she was using was inappropriate. They went to like the licensings basically with businesses and said, if you don't do this in restaurants and places and require these masks and all this other kind of stuff, we're going to pull your license. So they found another way to really be tyrannical with the people. But in that case, it was the restaurants and businesses and so on that had to enforce the policies. And so it was like them against their customers, because if they didn't do it, then they were going to be fined out of existence, lose their, papers and so on to be able to conduct their business. So when all else fails, like the best strategy they have is to turn us against each other. Like Biden knows that he cannot just do an executive order and force everyone to get the mandate and so on. He can't do that. I don't think he's beyond trying that, by the way. I don't think he's beyond trying that. But right now he's saying, hey, businesses, please do that. And there are businesses doing that. I think more will be emboldened to do that if people don't push back and fight against it. So people really do need to speak up about it. Whether you are vaccinated or not, I think you should stand up for people's freedoms and their rights to not be forced to do this. Like, I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not particularly like gung-ho on getting them. I'm not someone who's like, oh, here's a flu shot, let me get that. That's just not me. It's just not me. But I'm not for mandates, and I will fight really hard against that. And I think everyone should. I know there's some people on the right who made the case that they think that forced vaccination is acceptable because someone's life, they believe, freedom, your freedom ends after like where their nose starts or so, your nose ends and their nose starts or something. And when it comes to like a disease that can pass, it's a little bit different. But I still think that is a dangerous position because, and I've made this case before, and I've written an article about it on my website, and I've done it talked about it in shows. I don't believe the government, it, you can trust them with that much power. I think it's really, really dangerous to do so. This is the same government that is trying to mandate you to get this vaccine is the same one that will look you in your eye and say that murdering babies is women's health care. The very same government. The very same government. So, and I'm not trying to make the case that this vaccine is unsafe. I'm saying we are down an unsafe path if they have the authority, if we just allow them to have the authority to tell them what we have to inject inside of us. So even if you are fully vaccinated, 2 shots, about to get your booster, I encourage you to pick up your picket sign and stand beside other people who want to exercise their freedoms. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have our freedoms and liberty in America, we're screwed. Where else do we go? Can't go to Australia. They're shooting puppies. I don't know if they're puppies, but they shot dogs in like a shelter because they didn't want people to go back and get them. They wanted people to stay in place. They're so on such a strict lockdown that they shot dogs. I'm not an animal person, but I know people love animals. Sometimes people love animals more than they actually like people. So if Australia is at the point where they're just shooting dogs, I'm like, how far are these people willing to go? And it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad there. Okay, let's move on to Afghanistan. So the Biden administration, it's like they want to focus on COVID because there's still a lot of people who are so gripped with fear that they're willing to go along with anything that happens. But there's people in Afghanistan across the board, people acknowledge this is pretty bad. And you got to be a pretty harsh sycophant to like the Democrats and the Biden administration to pretend that it's not and that they're doing the best that they can. And it's like it was a little mistake and they're just up there trying to be competent and fix it. No, like there's this one TikToker, he's a kid, and he was like, the Biden administration is doing the best they can. And if you contrast that with like other consultants and stuff, my sister was talking to me, my oldest sister, and she's like, I got a lot of people who worked for the Democrats on my friends list, consultants, people who worked in DC on things, for congressmen and other people like that. And she said, these people are quiet. They are dead quiet. And, I don't really see people on my sphere, like standing up for them and stuff either. Like, this is awful. This whole situation is terrible. The media is still like up in arms about it. It's awful. So unless you're like some young sycophant trying to, I don't know, get a cookie from President Biden, everyone pretty much acknowledges that not that they didn't want to still leave, but how they left, leaving people behind, was ridiculous. So Jen Psaki the other day said she didn't think it was fair to characterize this as Americans being stranded. I'm just going to play the clip.
Our materials and equipment.
But does the president have a sense that most of the criticism is not of leaving Afghanistan, it's the way that he has ordered it to happen? By pulling the troops before getting these Americans who are now stranded. Does he have a sense of that?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Okay, and then follow.
Okay, so they keep repeating this, we will get all Americans out who want to get out. And the Taliban is saying you have a hard set date of the 31st period. And the Biden team was like, we have the date. We're going to get as many people out by the date. And we got mixed messaging on that. Are they going to extend it? Are they going to keep giving their trying to get people out or not? So we will see what happens, but people are very concerned about that window. But she said you could call. That was news to me, because people were saying don't call. You got to fill out the information online. And they were saying you just got to try to get to the airport, that they don't have the capability of going in and just rescuing and escorting people there, even though you had like the French and the British doing that, going in and rescuing their people, which is making Americans look bad. And allies around the world are just in awe of the hot mess this all is. It's crazy how many people were upset or embarrassed by Trump, by his rhetoric and his behavior. Like, there were like personality things. Maybe they didn't like how tough he was with NATO, talking about they need to pay up and all this other kind of stuff. But was it childish that he goes to an event with all the world leaders and he just shoves his way through? Like, that is some mad alpha male energy, I guess. Were they mad that he walked in front of the Queen for a little bit? Were they mad that he fed the koi fish and all this other kind of stuff? I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so embarrassed. But now you actually have someone who has done something, created this big international incident where people are genuinely calling out and condemning America for their actions, for being such a failed leader and causing so much chaos and death. And they're like, don't call it being stranded. We're doing everything we can. No, you're not doing everything you can. You lied to the American people's face. There was a meeting the other night with the Intelligence Committee, and Adam Schiff and other people talked, and it doesn't appear, main takeaways from it is it doesn't appear that there was some kind of intelligence failure, which means that that Americans were misled by the president when he was like, nothing, the Taliban's not going to be able to overrun it. We don't foresee that happening. The nation will stand, the army will do whatever. You can't totally guess, I guess, what the army will do, but you should be able, intelligence should be able to guess that to a degree. But Biden just wanted to pull out, and they lied, like what it was last month when they had that interview, and he's like, oh, it's not going to be like Saigon. Those were lies, people. Those were lies. The intelligence was good. They just made dumb decisions on purpose for whatever reason. For whatever reason, they made the decisions. So people tried to call. They couldn't call. They're like, don't call the embassy. You got to go online, fill out the form. And by the way, you have to like pay $2,000. Now, the Biden administration has had some people say, we don't, in this situation, we expect people to pay. But it was still there. Like last I checked, that you'd have to pay $2,000 for the flight. And you have to sign like a waiver that is, if you don't pay it, they promise to pay it, but when it's time to renew your passport, the passport won't be renewed. I saw someone say like, you can just keep it then. You can just keep my passport. So there's all these people who you won't help get to the airport. You know how hard it is to get there? You got the Taliban everywhere. I saw a story where there was a woman who was trying to get to the airport, but she didn't have a man, so the Taliban just beat her. You know, they want to enact Sharia law back to the country with all these people who've had freedom there for, you know, trying to figure out freedom, at least for the past 20 years. It's about as long as, you know, we've been involved in this conflict. And the average age I heard was like 18 and a half. So there's a lot of people who don't remember how things were under the rule of the Taliban that are about to get a rude awakening. And how much are they vetting these people? There was someone who got through who's on the no-fly list. How can you possibly vet all these people in this sort of chaos? So yeah, there are Americans who are absolutely stranded, and she can be offended at that characterization all she wants, but it's still true. It's still true. It is still absolutely true. Jen Psaki is a hot mess. There was another clip. I played this last week, but this was on Breonna Keller's show, and I just want to play a little bit of this as well.
There are a lot of details that you're unable to share with us. How does the administration see its moral obligation to Afghans who helped the U.S. And because of those Afghans, there are Americans, service members and civilians, who are still alive. How does the administration see its moral obligation to those people?
Absolutely. The president does feel a moral obligation. He's spoken to this. He has said we are going to work to help protect and get out those people who helped our servicemen and women over the last 20 years. He absolutely feels a moral obligation. So that's why he has directed his team to move rapidly. It's why when he came into office,
you'll work to get them out. You'll work to get them out. I do want. You'll work to get them out. But you know, this isn't horseshoes, right? Close doesn't matter. Will you get them out?
But look, the president has committed we will get every American who wants to get out of Afghanistan, and we are working to move as many of our allies who helped us, who stood by us, who helped our servicemen and women get out as possible. And I would note that when he came into office, he moved to condense the visa process for SIVs. This has been a priority for him to try to move people out of the country who helped us over the last 20 years. So that's what he's focused on, and that's what he's working on doing.
So you guys know I do not like Breonna Keller for particular reasons and interviews and so on. But yeah, this is a hot mess. And they keep saying we'll get everyone else who wants to get out. I don't trust that. Because I think at the end of the day, they're going to say, well, we got everyone out who want to get out, while just ignoring people who they didn't have time to get, or people who couldn't get to the airport on their own. And they're going to be like, well, everyone who made it here at the airport, we got them out. And there's just going to be people who are just could not make the journey, who were not helped. Because America's like, we don't have the capability to do that. Like, yes, Don Bongino was like on his show ranting about, he's like, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to set up like different checkpoints and stuff. He's like, is that not that hard to do? So he was complaining about it. And everyone's upset about this. And y'all know how much of a shill I think Breonna Keller is, but even she was giving it to them. So obviously terrible situation in Afghanistan. And I hope they can get everyone else out who wants to genuinely get out. But I wish that there was more help on the ground to get there. And you'd have to pay $2,000. That's just my opinion. So let's move on. So Sony has, well, first of all, there was a leak for the Spiderman trailer. There was a leak at first, which is pretty hilarious because so many people were waiting for the Spider-Man trailer to drop and for their new film, No Way Home. And someone at Sony, I guess, recorded with a camera phone, and then really, really bad quality trailer dropped. And then 24 hours, Marvel decided to go ahead and release it. So the premise of the trailer doesn't look the best to me. And just to be fair, just to be frank, I'm not crazy about the MCU Spider-Man films. And I don't want to go into all the reasons why I'm not a fan. Because that would take too long, longer than I want to spend in the segment talking about it. But briefly in the first film, I didn't like, I think that Tom Holland is a very good Spider-Man. And I've liked him in like other films, like in Civil War. I thought it was great. I thought in Infinity War and all that kind of stuff. He was great. But when it got to his own movie, it was just like watching failure after failure after failure. It was really frustrating. I understand he's young, and but still, he like knocked himself out at one point. He webbed someone else to their own car because he thought they were like stealing it. He's tried to stop a robbery, but they had all these like alien technology, so it didn't go very smoothly. He had a very hard time with the Vulture. At one point in the movie, he knocked himself out. He did save Mary Jane and some of his classmates at the is the Washington Monument, the one that's like really tall, like a spear. But they were in danger because of a decision that he had made. And when he had his final battle with the Vulture, he like just survived that battle. He like did not he did like not win it to me. So when people are like, oh, he's so much better than the Tobey Maguire, I'm like, at least Tobey Maguire won. Could take, like, I do not, it doesn't seem like he could take on his villains. Because he's just having a rough time out there. So in the next film, it takes place after the Endgame film. And Tony has died. Just spoiler, I'm sorry if this is a big spoiler. And so he leaves his kid a bunch of like drones that Tony has, like it's a major defense system across the world. He gave it to Spider-Man. This kid's a kid. He's in high school. And at one point, he accidentally almost kills a classmate with them. So the story itself is just unforgivably stupid to me. And there's lots of other things that I don't like about it. But anyway, the main villain is Mysterio. And so he's pretending to be a superhero. And he cons Peter into giving him this defense system that Tony has left for him. Which turns out he's a disgruntled employee, which apparently a lot of villains are disgruntled because of Tony Stark. Civil War should have been just Tony agreeing to stop doing things. Because the Vulture was also like disgruntled because of Tony Stark, and because he had like but he had a job to like basically clean up New York after the first Avengers film with all like the alien tech and stuff that was like in the streets or whatever. And the government came in and was like, oh, sorry, we're not going to do that. And then like Stark Industries or whatever was like working with the government to like clean up all that stuff. He's like, I rented these trucks. Like if I don't have this job, like I'm going to go bankrupt. And like, that's not on us. And then he was just like, snap, like, okay, I'm going to do illegal stuff now. So everything sort of relates back to Tony Stark. So anyway, Mysterio ended up dying, but he made it look like Peter had killed him with the drones. And then he also leaked his secret identity. So everyone was like, oh my gosh, the twist at the end. And I'm just like, okay, so Spider-Man did reveal his secret identity in the comic books. Thank you for all of those who are interested in history. And not necessarily so much interested in the comic books, but I'm going to try to go through this, explain it as well as I can on why I'm not too happy about the trailer and where it's going and why it really reminds me of like the worst story that I've read in Spider-Man comics. And it's one of my least favorite stories that I've ever read in comics. As a matter of fact, my dad bought like comic books like consistently throughout the 70s, like Spider-Man's consistently like throughout the 70s. And this particular story that it looks like this movie is like hinting to taking elements from is the story that made him stop buying Spider-Man comic books. So it wasn't a Clone Saga, it was One More Day. So in the comic books, Peter Parker did reveal his secret identity. And at this point in time, he was a grown man. He has a villains gallery that is second to probably only Batman's villains gallery. Very iconic villains. So contrast that with movie Peter, who he's fought like the Vulture, and they had Shocker, and is that it? I mean, and Mysterio, but he's dead. So yeah. So and I guess there's like petty crooks or whatever. He did a lot of like global stuff with the Avengers and stuff, but he does not have like a big buildup of like contrast that with what the comic books had, and even with the other movie counterparts had at this point in time. So there was just a lot more on the line and a lot more for Peter to lose, revealing that secret identity, than Peter in the MCU. So to me, it was a really big thing that happened, but there was no build up to make me feel any sort of way about it. And even the plot line of, oh my gosh, he killed Mysterio is stupid because he was obviously a disgruntled employee working for Tony Stark. And Pepper Potts could just get on TV and be like, this was a disgruntled employee and Peter Parker just helped save the universe. So this is obviously a lie. And I feel like most people should be able to accept that. So I thought the film was like egregiously stupid. Period. So we're going into the new film. So at the time when Parker revealed his identity in the comic books, that was in the Civil War storyline, which they did adapt like elements of that into an MCU film. So it was like Team Cap versus Team Iron Man. And so at this point in time, Peter was an Avenger. And Tony kind of took him under his wing. He was kind of like his apprentice. So Peter had, he went from someone who, he was a teacher at the time. So he had a job, but Peter's like life is, hey, I gotta make sure I can afford web cartridge fluid because he has to make it himself, And so by this time he's married to Mary Jane. He has his aunt who does know about his secret identity, and she's elderly, very elderly. Contrasted to like the movie, who's a younger woman, but she's elderly. And so, but he's living at Stark Tower, and he's like really part of the family. So then the superhero registration comes in, and people have to pick a side. So Tony goes to him, and they convince him like, maybe it was his idea. I haven't read it in such a long time. It came out in like 2006. It was like 2006 to 2007 because it took a long time for them to finish it. So many delays, and then they kept adding stories, like adding stories. But I think there was only like 7 main books, but this touched like the whole Marvel universe, except like the X-Men were like, we're staying out of it. So Peter decided with his family that, hey, we could be on the right side of history here. Like, I've been in the shadows all this time, and I can step forward into light and say, hey, this is who I am. So I think this is at the end of like the second issue. They had a big press conference, and he took off his mask and he said, hey, my name is Peter Parker, and I've been Spider-Man since I was 15 years old. And the panel is cut off, but right after there, they showed Jane Innocent, and he like fainted and stuff. He actually ended up suing Peter after that for like selling photos of himself. So this made things very chaotic for Peter. And so it was ultimately his decision. I did feel like Tony took advantage of him, I guess. And obviously he has a very big villains gallery that could come up against him and hurt him and his family, his friends, and so on. So Peter Parker ended up having a huge moral conundrum in the Civil War. So he ends up switching from Team Iron Man and going to Team Captain America because the things that, Iron Man and them were doing, they didn't like they had Thor was dead at the time. And I don't know if they knew that he was dead, but he was gone. But they cloned him. They did a Thor clone, and he ended up killing one of the Avengers or former Avengers. And they did other stuff that was shady, and Peter just didn't. It was like nagging him the entire time, and eventually he decided to switch. And so he joined the rebellion and stuff, but Captain America's side ultimately ended up failing. And so Peter was really at it with Iron Man, and he was wearing like the Iron Spider-Man suit, which he had to obviously get rid of that because he did figure out a way to power, or I guess reprogram it when Tony tried to take control of it. He had reprogrammed it himself, but to keep Tony from trying to do that again, he just went back to his like classic suit. So he's no longer living in Avengers Tower. He's no longer getting that really nice paycheck from Tony, which, by the way, they all thought it was really impressive that he created the cartridge fluid. They're just like, you're wasting your life not living like a rich man, and you made this webbing fluid that is so strong and tough. Like, do you understand how we could patent this to make all this kind of money? Like, that's crazy that you could do this as a kid and you're not making money. So his life was really going in a different direction, and they took it all like away from him. So Kingpin sent an assassin to go try to take out his family. And so I think he was trying to hit Mary Jane, and he pushed Mary Jane out of the way. Or maybe, I can't remember if he was trying to shoot Mary Jane or was trying to shoot Peter, but I believe he pushed Mary Jane out the way, and Aunt May ended up getting shot. So Aunt May was dying. And so that launched a really, really good series after the Civil War with the Spider-Man book. It was Back in Black. So he donned his black Spider-Man costume. So everyone's thinking like, oh, because he's going to the dark side, he's going to like cross the line. He's going to kill find out the person who did this, and he's going to kill them. So he finds out it was Kingpin. So he ends up breaking into prison and just beating the stew out of Kingpin. These frames aren't in order, by the way. But ultimately, he decided to put on the suit because it is a representation of how Spider-Man would not cross that line. But when he goes in prison, he's like, I'm not going to kill you. He takes off his mask and he says, I am, just as like Peter Parker. And he beats the stew out of Kingpin. It's great. Really, really great. And then he describes how he's going to kill him. When May takes her last breath, he's going to come back. He's going to come back and he's going to spray the webbing into his mouth, and it's going to cause him to die an excruciating death as soon as she takes her last breath. So at this point of time, Marvel has done something extraordinary with Spider-Man's story, and they are really going, they've done a lot. His secret identity is revealed to all, and he's about to kill the Kingpin. He's about to cross that line. So naturally, they have to undo it. After Marvel said they will not undo it, they decided they're going to undo it. So that leads you into One More Day, which they are waiting at the point for Aunt May to die. And I freaking not kid you, Mephisto, who is like a Satan-like character, comes to them. So the devil comes to them and says, I'll save Aunt May's life, but I want your marriage in return. Is that not the cheesiest garbage crap you've ever heard in your life? Is that not the cheesiest garbage crap you've ever heard in your life? So there's this panel here explaining why Mephisto has chosen them. And he's like, well, your love is so pure. And basically he wants to stick it to God. Like, I just want to get one up on him, your love. And because it's so pure. And so I want to be able to take it. And so, but the craziest thing about this to me is like, they've been through ups and downs. They've been separated before. She's been like, he thought she was dead at one point in time. They've just been through the ringer as a couple. But there was another storyline called House of M with Wanda, and everyone knows how powerful Wanda is. Well, Wanda basically remade the universe at one point. She tried to give everyone their wish, and so mutants basically ruled the world. They were the superior race, and Magneto was like over them. And Captain America had never got frozen in the ice. But Spider-Man, he was married to Gwen Stacy. He wasn't married to Mary Jane. And so when all this was over, the House of M stuff, he carried that guilt with him because he had the perfect life. And Mary Jane wasn't the woman he spent it with. I'm not saying they don't love each other. They don't genuinely love each other. He loves Mary Jane. Mary Jane loves him, period. But to be like, the love was so pure, Satan had to steal it. I hate when stories are like super, super contrived. It's not natural. There's not a good flow. And the devil stealing your marriage. Like the editor-in-chief at the time was Joe Quesada, and people had decided that they wanted to kind of go back to basics with Spider-Man. And there's a good friend of mine. He's a pastor. He that didn't like Spider-Man, went on a rant one day. And the reason why he didn't like Spider-Man is because he feels like he's a perpetual child. Because he's always like, doesn't have money, doesn't have a license, which he can web sling and lives in New York. So I guess that's not as big a thing, but he doesn't have a license. He just is always going to broke, just kind of struggling through life and doesn't. And he just like went on a rant on why he's like perpetually just never kind of growing up. And then they had this storyline, and my sister's like, man, he was right, because they wanted to reset it back to the days of, instead of him being a bachelor, being a married man, they wanted to take away his marriage so he'd go back to being broke, trying to afford rent and webbing fluid ingredients and jumping around dating woman to woman to woman instead of having a stable relationship. Instead of like inventing like new stories that could be good, that could work within that realm, they're like, let's make him single. And let's have the devil take away their marriage. It was such a disrespectful way of life. So not too long ago, you had Peter Parker, who's an Avenger, living in Avengers Tower, working for Tony Stark, getting all like having a nice job and so on. And then after One More Day, you had events of Brand New Day where he's like broke trying to afford rent and web cartridge fluid, and he's single. And then Joe Quesada would get really offended and defensive when he's like, what was so great about Peter being married? I'm like, maybe because you guys built it up and had this big wedding, and this is like the love of his life that the fans really liked, because Stan Lee really liked Gwen Stacy. He kept trying to like make her more interesting, but the fans they preferred Mary Jane. So he killed Gwen Stacy. So the writer of Spider-Man, who had been the writer for Amazing Spider-Man, I think it was for 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, J. Michael Straczynski. He's also a film writer, but he was working on Spider-Man for years. And this was like the last story he wrote. And he disliked it so much that he wanted to take his name off the last 2 books. Not kidding. But out of respect for Marvel and Joe and all them, he left it on. But it's a terrible, terrible story. It's a terrible story. So ultimately, the couple decides to go ahead and make the deal because they know. But the crazy thing about that is that May is really old, and May would not want them to do this. She really would not want them to do this. But they we can't basically live with this kind of guilt because she was killed by the bullet that was meant to take the Mary Jane out, and in the chaos of what their decision was. Their decision as a family, it was a dumb decision, but they did come together as a family to decide it. And of course there would be consequences like this. Why wouldn't there be? And so and there was these visions that, oh, gosh. And the crazy thing is it wasn't just Amazing Spider-Man. There was 3 different Spider-Man titles at the time. And there was one that was Spectacular Spider-Man, I think it was. And he talked to someone in the story. He was just trying to go through his thoughts. And then he could obviously see that it was God talking to him. And God was like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. And then I think in the very next book that came out was the last Amazing Spider-Man book on it. And then he decided to go ahead and make the deal with the devil. You had God who took the time to talk to you and say everything's going to be okay. And he's like, okay. And then he signs the deal with the devil. And then there was this little girl who was in a vision or whatever, as kind of walking through them as their guide. And then after they decide to make the deal, they're like, oh my gosh, who was the little girl? And obviously it was your daughter, you idiots. Obviously it was your daughter. Which I read a lot of Amazing Spider-Girl when that came out. Obviously it was your daughter. And then Mary Jane they're like, it's okay. Mary Jane's like, in my heart of hearts, I know we'll find each other again. I know we will. It was such a terrible storyline. It was so bad. So it was panned by the fans. It was panned by the critics. Again, the writer who had been writing Spider-Man for a long time did not even want to put his name on the last 2 books. And the editor-in-chief, Joe Quesada, they had an agenda. They pushed it through. It didn't flow. It wasn't a good story. It wasn't. Some people thought, even though it was a bad idea, that the writers did the best what they could with it. No, I don't think so. Because I think this panel, like I said, is stupid. It's just stupid. It's so contrived. It's ridiculous. It's such a dumb story. So after, like I said, my dad had been buying Spider-Man consistently throughout since the 70s. And after that, he's like, I don't want to buy anymore. I think he read the Brand New Day, the series that started after that, and he was like, I don't like where this is going. So that was really the last time we bought Spider-Man comic books, and we bought them all because there's 3-4 different titles. Spider-Man was a really popular book, but it was bad. It was really terrible. So anyway, the movie, back to the trailer. So that's the background on One More Day. So the reason why I say that people are getting vibes of One More Day with the Spider-Man book is because Peter goes to Doctor Strange. If you haven't seen the trailer, I'm talking about the trailer, FYI. And there are no spoilers beyond what I'm about to tell you. So that's in the trailer. So he is having a rough time because everyone thinks he killed Mysterio, or that's news that's out there, and so that's being debated. I don't know why, because obviously I feel like they should be able to have Pepper Potts go before the public and say this Mysterio was a disgruntled employee, talk about what he could possibly do with the capability of his technology, and that Peter wouldn't do that, and he just literally saved half the universe, and leave it at that. So anyway, there's a conflict with that. At the same time, everyone knows he's Spider-Man. He's going to school for some reason. and it's really hard on his family and his friends. And so he goes to Doctor Strange and say, hey, can you make it so that no one knows that the world doesn't know I'm Spider-Man? And so Wong is like, don't do that spell. It's too dangerous. And he's like, okay. And he kind of winks at Peter. And then he goes ahead and starts concocting the spell. And so from the trailer, then at that point, it looks like it gets botched. And I don't know if that means that they're traveling between different points of the multiverse with different Spider-Man because of how the spell is botched, or if the multiverses are going to bleed into each other. But we did see a hobgoblin, a Green Goblin, like a pumpkin bomb that they used like the first Spider-Man film with William Dafoe. We did see Dr. Octopus make a return. He was like, hello, Spider-Man. And we did see Lightning. There's speculation that Jamie Foxx will be in it, reprising his role as Electro, which that was awful. That was an awful film. The only thing they did good was Gwen Stacy's death. The whole relationship with that was fine, but and Garfield was a pretty good Peter Parker, but the movie was really bad. So there's rumors that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield will be in the films, but we do not know. For all we know, Peter could be living their lives throughout those multiverses and replaying some of those things in the film. I don't know. But we know that he goes to Doctor Strange because he doesn't want the world to know that he's Spider-Man. So at the end of Far From Home, they decided to do this huge change, this really bold change, and have the world know that he's Spider-Man. And they're like, oh, we got to undo that. Now, the question will be, is he really going to undo it? Are they, like, comic books take away stuff all the time. It's not fun. People don't like it, I don't think. Like, if it's a really, really bad decision, sure. But this was a major, if you just tease like a major thing and just immediately take it back, that's garbage, I think. Really, really bad decisions. But it looks like they're immediately going to either take it away, or maybe it will be It's a Wonderful Life situation where he does magic, and then at the end with all the chaos and stuff, and Peter sees what it's like for Tobey Maguire to hide his secret, and Andrew Garfield to hold her secret. Once he sees, I don't know, the lives of other Spider-Men, maybe he'll decide it's okay if the world knows I'm Spider-Man. He learns to deal with it. It could be It's a Wonderful Life or not, or he could just erase it. I don't know what the end result will be. You have to actually see the movie when it comes out, but people are just kind of speculating. But this takeaway thing, make a deal sort of thing, it does remind people of One More Day. And people have been suspecting that Mephisto would make an appearance again, an appearance into the Marvel Universe from the WandaVision show. People have been speculating it when they watch Loki. People are speculating because there was a sign with Peter Parker's face with like horns drawn in, that they think that's a hint at Mephisto. Now, to me, the fact that Stephen Strange would do this spell is, when I said the last film was just inconceivably stupid, this is inconceivably stupid to me. Like, some people are like, well, he's just arrogant. He didn't get rid of all that arrogance from his first film. It's like, okay, but he's done some responsible things. Like when Loki came to Earth in the third Thor movie, he was right on that. So just risking things, botching a spell that could, I don't know, intertwine multiverses or whatever is going to happen, that just seems nuts. That just seems nuts. That seems nuts. Peter wanted to be an Avenger so bad. They can learn to live with it. His aunt could relocate or whatever, and his friends and girlfriend, they could deal with that. But to do a spell like that, it's contrived in the same way that I thought Peter selling his marriage to the devil was. To undo a mistake. So that's where they're going. That's really awful. And to have anything that would be similar to One More Day is crazy to me. And if it is just a really Doctor Strange showing the It's a Wonderful Life sort of thing, that's a really lame idea for a movie, in my opinion. And I know It's a Wonderful Life is a very popular and famous movie. But that was the movie that like kind of started that trend. And by the way, I saw it for the first time a couple years ago. Not my favorite. not my favorite. It's a Wonderful Life. I know the classic, but there are some things that bother me about it. So don't like stone me. But I don't think that's a good idea for a Spider-Man movie. Not when he has like huge villains gallery that you could look to. We have not seen him face like, you know, the when they have the group with like 6 villains together. We're still waiting on that. Like there's so many things that they could do, but they're not. They haven't, and this doesn't look like a good path to go down, in my opinion. But I didn't like the other films either. So when they're like talking about all these things that could possibly happen, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna get Doc Ock. Oh my gosh, we're gonna get Green Goblin. Oh my gosh, we might get Toby. We might get Garfield. But I didn't like the other two, so I didn't think I would like this one. And there's a lot of people who love it, and there's a lot of Marvel normies who would probably pan my comments. But I don't like it. I don't like it. Not at all. So I'm not sure what they're going to do. Now, there were some cool little moments, I guess, you know, in the trailer. You know, he makes this cool little appearance again with this suit that he's got. This was like the suit that Peter, that I mentioned earlier, that they had, that Peter had to stop wearing the comic books because obviously Iron Man made it. It could be that if the twist could be that Stephen Strange has nothing to do with it, and it actually is Mephisto manipulating everything for whatever reason and using Peter for some reason and needed him to start mixing up the multiverse or whatever, and maybe Doctor Strange has nothing to do with what's going to happen at all. Maybe that could be the twist. I don't like to really speculate a lot about these things. Like, my sister kept trying to ask me things about what I think about WandaVision. I'm like, I'm not really interested enough in it to speculate. And thank God I didn't bother, because everyone was like wrong and everyone got their feelings hurt. And the things that the fans wanted to happen and were suggesting were way better than what actually happened. And some of the people were like trolling, you know, the actor who played Vision. He's like, oh, there's going to be a big special guest. And it was just himself fighting himself. And they're like, people are like, oh my gosh, Benedict Cumberbatch is Doctor Strange is going to show up. And that didn't even happen. Which Kevin Feige said, we don't need a white man coming in saving the day, basically, which is why all this stuff is really messed up, because all the wokeness is starting to really interfere with the content. So, to be honest, at this point in time, I don't intend to really see. I'm not, at least if I do, it's just gonna be to see if if I'm kind of correct in the way we're going. But I'm not running out to the theaters to go see this film. If they don't do harsh lockdowns and everyone can even go out to the theaters anyway, because they might say you have to show a vaccine passport to go sit in the theaters and watch it. We'll see. We'll see. They might have to still kind of do the streaming hybrid, which obviously didn't work out for Black Widow, but there's a lot more people interested to see the Spider-Man film than they were to see that movie or Shang-Chi that's coming up in like 10 days, I think, 10 or 9 days or something like that. So this might be the next big hit for Marvel, or they could see a continuing trend of people not as interested in what they're putting out. My hype for them has definitely died. I don't really love the direction of where they're going, what they're doing, and I definitely don't like the woke side of things that they inject in their movies, in their TV shows, in the children's shows, and especially in their comic books, which is sad. And I've talked about this because we have a big history with comic books, and I just don't have a lot of love for them because so much wokeness has pretty much gotten in the way. But I think this is a terrible direction if they are really reminiscing or touching off of One More Day. But people have to see how it is. But people, I'm not the only person who has noticed. People on Twitter have been talking about, I can't believe that they're doing One More Day. Now, some people are like, oh, they're doing One More Day, but making it good. And some people are like, this is a terrible idea. Like, why would they do the most hated story, the most disrespectful, hated story of a Spider-Man story that they could have made? We'll see. We will see what happens. We will see what happens. But anyway, that is the last thing I want to talk about today. Again, tomorrow I have a really interesting story for you guys. I did something over the weekend and I want to share what happened. I promise it'll be really, really interesting, really juicy. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow when I spill the tea about what happened over the weekend. Make sure that you guys go to blacktnews.com, that you check out different content that I have on my website, that you're sharing articles, other videos, and so on. I thank you guys who have liked my pages, subscribed to my YouTube channels, and so on. But please make sure that you're inviting other people to those accounts. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Most of my handles are at Black Tea News. The only one that is different is Twitter, which is True Black Tea. All my other ones are at Black Tea News. So make sure that you're liking, subscribing, and you're hitting notification bells, because apparently subscribing is not enough. You have to actually hit notification bells to actually see the content. So make sure that you're liking and that you're sharing. I do appreciate everyone who does that. If you would like to donate to blacktnews.com, you can go to blacktnews.com/donate and leave a donation if you like what I'm doing here, you like the website, you want to see it build some more. Please be a supporter of that. I appreciate everything that you guys can do. Make sure that you are going to the store, that you're checking out different merchandise, like the cool, the GOAT hoodies, the Defeat Joe Biden, Denounce White Supremacy shirts with a list of his racism on the back. And the I voted for President Trump and all I got was historic peace deals, border security, ISIS destroyed, energy independence, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm not the victim you're looking for shirt. It's really cool. We got stuff with the Black Tea logo, more Frederick Douglass stuff. And I love the you are not that special. And of course, we got that in mugs. So please check out the store and get something for yourself. Get a lot of things for yourself and get things for other people. And make sure that you are trolling a leftist today. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.